Hi, everyone. Gil Fried here with Venue Visionaries.
And this is Matthew Castell.
And we're glad that you're back and that we're back. We had a little bit of a break during the semester, so we could focus in on teaching. But now we're back to giving our listeners some interesting insight. And what started off as an interesting idea was a story that we had read, and we thought we'd share with you, and then give you some feedback associated with it. And this is in relation to the upcoming Olympics in Milan, Italy, and they are building ice hockey facility there. And the International Ice Hockey Federation approved a 60-meter by 26-meter sheet of ice, which is 196.85 feet by 85.5 feet. And so familiar with the decision to build it that size was indicating that, well, that's 3 feet shorter and only a hair wider than the 200 foot by 85 foot dimensions that are currently used by the NHL. So you might be saying, okay, it's only 3 feet. Can that make a huge difference? And the answer is yes, it can. If you're trained on a certain distance or certain length or certain type of facility, it becomes part of your DNA. When you get so used to it, you anticipate having a certain amount of room to be able to maneuver. And if you don't have that amount of room, it can cause an injury. What was interesting about the story is the fact that this is not a one-off. There are numerous examples of design and construction flaws in the venue area. And we thought that would be an interesting topic to cover because you're paying architects, you're paying getting everyone involved, and you have all these stakeholders and they're always meeting and always trying to develop the best possible stadium. And then sometimes you look at it and go like, what? How can we forget that? We forget something so simple. And one example that I have from a baseball example involved the Bridgeport Stadium, where the Bridgeport Bluefish played in Connecticut. And they built this beautiful stadium and they forgot any refrigeration. So they didn't have a refrigerator. So what are you going to do on the concession side? Here you need to cool down drinks. You have to have food like meat and chicken and all that kind of stuff in refrigerator and freezers. And they didn't think about putting that into the kitchen. So they designed this entire stadium, beautiful kitchen, and they didn't have that in there. So they had to put it in the concourse underneath the seating area, the refrigerator, which meant they had to go up and down in elevators to be able to bring stuff up to the kitchen cooking area from the refrigeration area. And those are kind of things that you look at and go, in hindsight, that shouldn't have been a mistake. That should have been caught early. Why didn't it get caught? And those are things we're going to be trying to talk about today. Matt, I'm sure you have a number of examples. Why don't you share a couple of them with the listeners?
Okay, well, I'll go to the city of Montreal to start off, the poor city of Montreal. They had a baseball team called the Montreal Expos, which is now the Washington Nationals, and their original stadium called Jerry Park. They literally built the wrong way. So when the sun was setting at a certain angle, the first baseman couldn't see the baseball. So if they started a day game and it went too long, they would have to take like a 15-minute break so the fielders could see the ball. They literally had to stop play, which obviously isn't good. This is an obvious error design. Probably some of you students don't know that when you build a baseball stadium or a football stadium, you have to calculate which way where the sun is, so it's not too bright, so you can continue play it when it's at a weird angle. And then from there, Montreal went on to build Olympic Stadium. That's where the Expos went to play next, and it went from bad to worse. Yeah, that was a stadium that the at the time the budget was just astronomical, and it kept getting higher and higher. And the stadium was intended for the '76 Olympics, which went off, I believe, successfully. But then the Expos, that was the Expos' new home after Jerry Park, and it was a stadium that they knew they're going to put the baseball team in, but it wasn't conceived for baseball, and it was just a nightmare for them. And it may have led to them eventually losing the team to Washington.
Yeah, that Montreal was, you know what kind of show. And you're right, the cost of it ballooned 10 times higher than what they anticipated. And they were paying for the stadium 30 years after it was finished and used for the Olympic Games. So it became like a poster child for what not to do. And part of it was, let's be creative. Let's put up this beautiful roof that was made out of fabric. But the people that designed it did not consider the weight load of snow, and it crashed down several times during its lifetime, which was a problem, and had to be completely replaced twice. Which you're not talking about a couple $100 kind of repair. This is significant. And then also a 55-ton beam crashed to the ground back in, I think it was 91. And part of the roof collapsed again in 99. So these are horrible things where people could actually die. And there have been situations where we've just by the, as we say, the grace of God, people didn't die. And one of them is the roof collapse in Hartford of the Civic Center, which happened in the late 70s. And it just so happened it was after a major basketball game, which saw the venue full, and it destroyed the venue. And it was just too much snow, and it took them a couple of years to rebuild it. That's kind of thing. Snow, you might not think about it if you're in Florida, but if you're up north, your design has to consider snow. What are some other examples that you could share with us, Matt?
Well, let's stay on the roof theme and let's stay on snow. We can go to the Metrodome in Minnesota, which was the former home of the Vikings and the Minnesota Twins. It was a dual-purpose stadium. They had all sorts of issues with snow, and at one point they had a collapse. And like you said, it was fortunate that it happened while the Vikings were not playing, where it snowed indoors after the roof collapsed. It could have been a serious injury or fatalities. And they were lucky that, like I said, nobody was there. And it's hard to believe that a stadium designed in Minneapolis wasn't ready for the snow. And speaking of Mother Nature, that takes us to Tropicana Field, where the Tampa Bay Rays play now. And as that was a stadium that Major League Baseball told them not to build, but the city of Tampa Bay built it anyway in hopes of winning a baseball team. And they've had issues with it since. And I think everyone knows during the Hurricanes last year, they ripped the roof off, and the team had to play in a spring training complex for the whole year. And again, I don't know if there's anything that stadium could have done differently. The Tropicana Field, is probably just one of those acts of Mother Nature. But again, when you're in Florida, you have to make sure you're hurricane rated and can withstand something like that.
When you start taking a look at nature, one of the big issues is the sun. And in especially like football practices and things like that, people can get heat strokes, so you need shade. But fans need shade as well. That is one of the issues with Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, is they built it, but they didn't consider when they were building it the heat in Santa Clara, which is a lot different than in San Francisco, where San Francisco, the wind coming off the bay, so it got colder. I remember as a kid going to games at Candlestick Park, and if it was an extra inning game, they gave you a badge, like a little pin saying, "I survived Candlestick Park," because it would get so cold even during the summertime. But that was the mentality when they were putting together Levi Stadium. And the east side of the stands are so exposed to the sun that in their first game in, I think it was 2014, I think it was a preseason game, 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And they had 60 emergency calls in that game, and one potential death related to heat-related issues. So you need to have protection for the fans. And when you don't think about little things like that, it can make it uncomfortable, but also can make it deadly. Even in the Roman Empire, they had fans protected by sailors, Navy people, that would hold up like an awning kind of thing over areas of the stadium to protect people from the sun. Also, they had people that were up there that were archers that would shoot people if they misbehaved. So crowd management was done a little bit differently in those days, kind of thing. But they were thinking about shade and protection 2,000 years ago. So why are we still coming up with venues today where they don't have these kind of things in mind? Are there any other examples that you could think of, Matt?
Um, yeah, well, we did have Sao Paulo where that would again the price ballooned on that one, and that's in Sao Paulo's in Brazil. The stadium was handed over to FIFA, which is the organization that handles the World Cup only 19 days before the opening match, or and it created all sorts of issues for it. So that's another problem that can happen.
And it shows that this is not a unique United States issue. This is a global issue when you're building facilities of, are you going to make mistakes? And one that I think is an interesting example was an ice arena that was built in Mongolia, the first and only ice arena in the country. And it was all the small details, like having enough room to bring in a 18-wheeler truck into the venue. Do you have what we call an elephant door that you could pull a big truck in like that? Do you have concession stands that are conveniently located to the kitchen? All these little things are the details that are critical. And what comes to my mind is the concept of measure twice, cut once. That if you're trying to do something right, you just don't eyeball it or spitball it or something else like that. You try thinking about all these little details. Who manages a large stadium? What are some of the things that come to your mind when you're thinking about, okay, we're looking at renovations or we're looking at changes to a facility? What should someone have, at least in the back of their mind, in terms of the knowledge base or the ability to predict in the future what might be used and how to avoid potential problems?
Well, I think one of the important things you need are stakeholders involved when you're doing this planning. You don't want to plan in a bubble. You want to have all the
Mhm.
people involved. You want to have the local municipality. If, let's say, it's a football venue, you want to have the NFL involved, or if it's college football, you want to have the NCAA involved. You want to speak to other people who have gone through renovations or building new stadiums, to see the lessons learned. Like you said, so you want to build it so you have some functionality so you can anticipate further events that you may not have now, but other people are starting to experience. So those are some of the key things. I think the other key thing is work closely with the architect and construction team. And it may help you to get an architect who has knowledge and background in doing other sports facilities, or other like-minded facilities, because they may bring a knowledge that of what they've done elsewhere that you may have. And those are just some of the common sense things that you can do when doing a renovation or new construction.
I agree with you 100%. It's never a good time to have someone break their teeth on a project the first time when it's a multi-billion dollar project. It's like someone who just got out of trade school and you want them to build the Taj Mahal. It's a nice thing to maybe give them the opportunity, but it's the devil's in the details. And one of the things that I would add to that is, actually, let me put two things. One is visit as many sites as possible, because that's where you're going to get ideas. You're going to get concepts. You're going to see what others are doing. Oftentimes when you're in the planning process, and I've done it for a couple of stadiums, where you'll put up pictures of, here's this stadium, and here's this kind of element and this kind of element, and be creative. As long as it fits within your budget, but also the practicality. If you're doing, let's say, some stadiums have merry-go-rounds or Ferris wheels or things like that, which might be good for baseball because you have summertime and it's good weather to be out there. The same kind of amenity might not work well at all at a football stadium, which is going to be open during winter time, going to be wanting to be out there in the cold. The second thing I would add to that is talk to people in the industry. We talk about stakeholders, but one of the key stakeholders that we often overlook are fellow venue operators that are out there who might have some wonderful insight to be able to say, hey, we tried doing it this way. There was a problem. this is how we dealt with it. So that way maybe you could identify those way in advance.
Yeah,
Any
absolutely.
other?
Lessons learned are key. And the more people you speak to, the more associations you can be in, like stadium managers, where you get that knowledge base of other people in the same situation as you, and it's gold. Information is great. And now with the internet and artificial intelligence, even when you can't do site visits, it's easier than ever to do your research and make sure you get it right. Like you said, you want to measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, and these things aren't just for big stadiums. It happens in small venues. It happens all over the place. Just think about someone's home and the repairs that you try doing there, or the design issues that you might face. So I think a key thing for us to always go back to is the fact that knowledge is power in this space. And the more that you can get additional knowledge and information, it's going to be wonderful for you to do that. And so part of it is not being in our myopic bubble of just being in the sport industry. You could find out a lot from other industries as well. So I always encourage people to read different things like Popular Mechanics, or business publications, or construction magazines, or loss prevention magazines, or whatever it might be, because you might find some interesting concepts there that you might not have thought about. And all of a sudden it's like the light bulb goes off. Why don't we try doing that in our venue? And now that we're looking at technology and how it can help us, that could provide us with a lot of opportunities. For example, a lot of venues were built in the past with box offices, and you might have had, 8 or 9 windows for a box office at a traditional facility. Now, do you only need one, maybe, because people are going ticketless? And then you might not need that except for like a will call window or something like that. So as times change, venues change, and you have to be able to keep up with those changes so you don't put something in that doesn't have value. And I think one of the biggest things that people want in any stadium and arena, more bathrooms, and storage, more storage and more bathrooms.
And I'll add one other thing, Gail, that once the sports facility is built, you're right, things are going to change. Even if you did it perfectly, within 10 years, you'll find the business has changed. So one thing that's valuable for a lot of sports facilities and stadium is to create a improvement fund, where year by year they're dedicating a certain amount of money or percentage of revenues towards an improvement fund, knowing that in 5, 10, 15 years times, they're going to have to renovate, to upgrade, to meet the new standard. So when that time comes, they have the money there. So financing isn't as hard as it normally is.
That's a great point. That brings us to our countdown. So we're going to be asking you a question, then taking a little break, and then giving you our response. So the question that we have is, what are some key strategies to avoid venue planning mistakes?
Okay, some of the key strategies for avoiding mistakes are a lot of the things we've already talked about. Do your homework, speak to the stakeholders, do site visits to other venues, make sure you're informed, you're doing your research, speaking to an architect that knows what they're doing, has a lot of experience, that can bring ideas to you. Those are the basic things, Gil. What besides the basic can you offer?
So one of the things that I would raise in the very beginning is, before you break ground, when you're in the middle of the planning process or the design process, wherever it is, hire your venue manager. You don't want to bring someone in after it's been completed. You want someone who's going to be there from the very beginning to be able to say, this is how I want to run this venue. This is how it should be designed. Because if you're bringing in an experienced person, they hopefully would have gone through this on a number of occasions at prior facilities and have gone through the ringer and know the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that's one thing that I would recommend from the very beginning. consult government bodies, consult industry bodies, consult people as possible. That's the stakeholder perspective. But regulatory compliance, I find, often becomes a major concern in the planning process, because you might have some wonderful ideas, but if the building inspector or the local government officials say, no, we don't want X, we don't want Y, then you're just going to be spinning your wheels. So you want to get them on board from the very beginning and supportive from the very beginning. You want to take a look at climate and environment. We've talked about that a number of times, but especially for an open air stadium, that is so critical to be able to address that and identify that as a concern. Even if it is a closed environment, so you're looking at a dome, maybe you still have to worry about parking and people getting to the venue. How are they going to get there in a safe manner? So that becomes a critical area to look at. And then there's making sure that you have flexibility. When you're building a facility, things will come up. Be nimble, that you can say, okay, I'm willing to change this. Maybe it's because of, let's say, tariffs, and you aren't able to get the kind of flooring that you want. Be flexible to be able to say, okay, we could pivot and maybe let's do something else instead. That could be a little bit harder sometimes, but it is an opportunity to maybe pivot and do something better. And that's often what we see with what we call value-based engineering, where you get something a little bit quicker, or a little bit cheaper, or a little bit better in one way versus another, whatever it might be. But you're trying to do something that gives you flexibility, but gives you quality in its place. And the last thing that I would end up with is there are a lot of wonderful ideas. There's a difference between ideas and execution. So what I would like to throw out there is a situation such as putting in gardens at stadiums. So a number of stadiums have put in gardens, and it's a wonderful thing. Fenway Park has a beautiful garden right outside their restaurant in the stadium, and they can pull some fresh produce there and everything else. But remember, a couple of years ago, there was some salmonella and other concerns from Chipotle, from local sourced food providers. That is a concern. So you have entities such as like the New York Mets that have a garden, and I don't think they really care about it, because they really can't serve the food there, because the concessionaire there does not want to have that liability concern of serving food that might potentially have salmonella. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just you have that with any time you grow something on a smaller scale, that you might have that. So they have it there, but they just give the fruits and vegetables to their employees. So that becomes something to think about. Do we want to spend a lot of effort and then get minimal return? It's great return for Fenway Park and the Boston Red Sox, not as much for the New York Mets just down the road. So that becomes one of those kind of things that you can think about, that you could plan something, but are you actually going to be using it on a regular basis? I don't know if you have any other thoughts like that as well, Matt.
Well, I think the thing is, when you're doing major renovation or new construction, is to make the effort, make the time to get it right from the beginning. Because if you don't, you're going to be stuck with a lot of things that are going to hinder your operation, or going to cost a lot of money to fix on the back end. So, taking more time to get it right on the front end is valuable.
Doing things right. Who would have thunk planning is about doing things right? And so that's, I think, the big takeaway from this. If you do the right planning and take your time, normally you're going to have a much stronger facility without as many headaches. That's it for us for Venue Visionaries this time. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and stay safe out there. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.